we're going to let him introduce himself. For those of you that are watching at home, make sure you call or email Kim. Let her know you watched it. This counts as a safety meeting and you do get paid for it. Let him introduce himself and pay attention, please.
Thank you. I'm going to walk down here and probably, well, if you wouldn't mind filling lights for me, to help see. We've got some videos that pop a little bit better if there's not much light on them. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cody Shervin. I'm the Operations Officer for Sedgwick County Emergency Management. And this is a presentation I put together for the Goddard School Bus Transportation folks. And they seemed to like it, so I thought, well, I'll offer it to other schools and take it on the road and we'll just see how well it plays. So hopefully it will have some good information for you. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the clues Mother Nature gives us when storms start to approach. The cloud features and things like that, what we can see with our eyes, what we can see on the radar, and using those together to know how to stay safe. Because of course that's what it's all about, keeping yourself safe, but more importantly keeping your precious cargo safe, making it safely back here to the bus barn. The way we can do that is through observation and also through planning ahead and knowing what days are more of a threat and knowing what to do when those storm features threaten us. And then if there's time, I'd like you to report what you see to the National Weather Service office. And we'll talk about that and why that's important here as we go through the presentation. But this is really important stuff because nobody wants to end up in a scenario like this.
It's 3:15 p.m., March 2nd. Storm sirens are wailing. The 36,000-pound school bus is no match for the tornado. Debris flying, lightning flashing. Watch how the bus moves across the parking lot, slams into a car, and then is lifted and carried across the road, crashing into a diner.
So it's picked
The
up
bus
the bus.
microphone even picking up the sound of glass breaking inside the restaurant.
It's picked up the bus and thrown it across the street into a restaurant.
On this bus, just 13 minutes earlier, 11 children heading home, dismissed early because of the threat of severe weather. The driver reassures them. The bus now a minute and a half from the school.
There's a tornado right there, guys. Look, the tunnel cloud.
Harry is anxious but has calm instruction for her precious cargo.
Don't block me, sir. Don't block me. Guys, we're just going to go as fast as we can into the school.
The bus pulls up to the school.
Everybody stay together. All our group together right now. Go, 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 go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Come on. 11, go. Go, go.
Just 3 minutes later, Harry's cell phone still in the driver's seat. The bus is blown away.
Can you imagine the terror that was going through her mind? But she performed heroically. The better way to handle a situation like that, of course, is to not get into that situation in the first place. So that's why we talk about planning ahead. But things go wrong. We were really fortunate last year with the April 29th tornado, the Andover tornado, that it occurred so late in the evening. Because if it occurred earlier in the afternoon while buses were still out, they might not have gotten much warning and they may have found themselves in a similar situation. So that's why it's really important to be able to recognize things that the clues that are out there and use sources of information like a radar application on your phone to make sure you're well informed and you know what's coming your way in plenty of time to avoid it. Here's what we're going to focus on in the first part of the presentation, the severity index of storms and just some of the features that about each and whether we need to be worried about it or not as they move into our area. So you see the least severe to the most severe, the single-cell pulse thunderstorms, multi-cell clusters, multi-cell squall lines, and then supercell thunderstorms. You see something like this, we call these popcorn thunderstorms. They pop up, they rain themselves out, they dissipate, they go away. Maybe as they die, they might start to produce some really strong winds, and you'll get a gust front off of them, but it's not very large and it's not very long-lasting. And it's probably not even severe level winds. It's probably more in the nature of 50, 55 miles an hour at the most. They are capable of producing some small hail. If you're going to go behind one of these, usually they don't move very fast, so they might drop a lot of rain right where they're at. But they're not going to raise the creeks and streams around here. They're not going to cause water to overflow the roadways. They might fill the ditches, and you might have to look out for that. But generally speaking, this is, as it says, a very low threat type of storm situation. You see these coming on radar. There's really nothing we have to do different in our day or in our route. We just need to be aware if we're going to drive into the core of one of them for a few minutes, we might get some really heavy rain. Now, instead of just single popcorn thunderstorms popping up all over the place, these single cells have banded together and they formed a multi-cell cluster. And look at the line of movement of this. Imagine if you were in the path of the storm as it just keeps redeveloping and backbuilding and moving over the same area over and over and over again. That obviously is going to lead for a chance of some very serious flooding. Even if it doesn't fall here, if it falls farther upstream, that water is going to make it down this way eventually. So if you're watching your radar, wherever you're at, on TV, on your phone, or whatever it is, and you see this type of multi-cell development moving along a line like this, we have to recognize our threat for this eventually is going to be flooding. Maybe not right away, but as it continues to linger in the same area for several hours sometimes, then we are going to see creeks and streams and all little tributaries starting to rise. We have to be alert for the possibility of water across our roadway and what that means and how we need to react to that. Another type of multi-cell storm is when they band together, and now instead of moving across the same area, training over the same area, they're moving across as a giant line of storms. A squall line is what this is called. And the main threat with squall lines is severe winds. And it's bad enough when you're driving, a truck or an SUV or a car, but when you're driving a school bus and there's a squall line in the area, you really have to be on alert, because the straight line winds off these things can approach triple digits. And you can obviously know what that's going to do to a bus. So we need to recognize these when they're still a good ways off and plan accordingly. If we need to release early, if we need to keep them in place a little bit longer, if we need to alter our route headed home, we need to recognize what a squall line is. And what if we see them out in the field, we're going to see this predominant cloud feature along the bottom here, this white wedge-shaped cloud along the bottom of that. It's called a shelf cloud. That tells me I've got a squall line coming. You see in the radar image that's captured there, they can extend for hundreds of miles. They're usually moving along in a straight line. Sometimes they go out. But when they're formed in a straight line like this, their line of movement is going to be perpendicular to the front edge of the line. So this one's pointing from the northeast to the southwest. The line of movement is going to be coming off to the southeast of that. And all along the very leading edge of that, we'll know we've got a squall line coming because we're going to see this shelf cloud filling our field of view from horizon to horizon. Now sometimes we can see where the threat is with the squall line, and sometimes we can't. In this particular case here, you might be tempted to think it's the reds and the oranges and the pinks and things like that where the heaviest rain is, or maybe even some hail cords on this one. But usually the greatest threat with the squall line, being severe straight line winds, is not right there where the rain is. It's out along the leading edge, this thin blue line that you see in this next image here. That's where the gust front is. That's where the boundary is meeting, the outflow boundary is meeting the inflow boundary. And I should have talked about that with the wedge cloud. The shelf cloud that is along the very front edge of that is the byproduct of outflow meeting inflow. So you've got warm, moist air going into the storm and cold, dry air coming out because of the cold front pushing that frontal system along. Where warm air and cold air meet, the warm air is going to rise. It's going to be undercut and forced up. And so you're going to get that triangle or wedge-shaped cloud right on the very leading edge of your squall line. And you'll see that in the video here that I'm about to play too. And now think about what's going to happen to any cloud that's between my hands. With warm air going up really fast here and cold air coming out really fast here, any cloud that's caught between my hands is going to be spinning. You're going to have rotation with the squall line. But it's important to recognize it for what it is and what it's not. It's horizontal rotation. It's parallel to the ground. It's not vertical rotation that we associate with tornadoes. So when you see something like what you're about to see in this video, yes, it's concerning, but it's not anything that is going to be necessarily tornadic. I think it plays in full screen. No, it doesn't play in full screen. So watch down here. Notice the trees before the squall line gets here. Trees aren't hardly doing anything. Here comes your shelf cloud right here. And then watch what the trees do. And see how the clouds are rolling there? It'll loop back around. Notice also, we don't ever see any rain arrive before this thing resets and reloops back around. When we do see all that chaotic and violent cloud motion, we see the effect of the strong winds. I thought it would loop back. So let me play it one more time. Widely scattered audience. Ah, come on. Cooperate with me. Technology's great when it works. All right, here we go. So watch again. Our shelf cloud coming down here. There it is. There's our shelf cloud about to come over the top of us. The winds pick up exponentially, and then there's that rolling cloud, spinning horizontally. So it is concerning because of the straight line winds and what's coming with the gust front, but we're not really worried about tornadoes with this. Hail might be a possibility, but usually that's on the lower end of the threat scale. But it doesn't take a tornado, it doesn't take hail to be dangerous. Strong straight line winds can ruin your day in a hurry, especially if you're driving a high profile vehicle like a bus. So we need to recognize the threat of a squall line, and we need to alter our plans accordingly if it's something that we're going to get caught out in the middle of. In terms of positioning, this is a slide that I use when I'm talking about with my storm spotters and what they do to find a safe spotting position on a squall line. And really there is none. This is the entire state of Arkansas that we're looking at here. Missouri border up there, the red line at the top, Louisiana border down here. Everybody in that state, every school district, every bus was going to get impacted by that squall line on that day as it came through. There was really nothing they could do except plan and prepare ahead of time. Not be out driving in this storm when it came. Now, sometimes they can develop and move into an area where we weren't expecting it. Usually we'll get more of a warning on these things than that, so that we don't get caught off guard outside. But if we are outside when the squall line starts to move in, the most important thing to do is stop and point directly into that storm. You want to give it the lowest profile possible. You don't want to show it your broadside because it will knock you over. So you stop, you point directly into the oncoming gust front, you wait for it to pass. You may need to wait for the rain to pass too if it's heavy enough that you can't see where you're going. But wait for the storm front to pass, then you continue on your way. The last thing you want to be doing, if this one's moving mostly east and west, the last thing you want to be doing is driving north or south in front of it, because now you've given it your broadside, and now you're exposed to those very strong straight line winds. And these are types of storms that will produce severe thunderstorm warnings based on wind strength alone, and it's a type of situation that you just cannot get yourself into if you're driving a bus. Another thing to look out for when a squall line moves, instead of nice and straight line, we've got this kind of U shape to the storm on the radar here. We've got a bow echo on the radar, and we've got a corresponding bowing in the clouds here. Everybody in the path of this storm is in danger of those strong straight line winds wherever that gust front comes through, maybe with this thin green line right here. But we're on the edges of the storm, we're on the edges of that curve, we're talking about 45, 50, 55 miles an hour. The closer we get to the peak of this bow, the closer we're getting to 65, 70, 75, or even stronger winds. Because this is the worst of the squall line. It's being formed, it's bowing out. Instead of moving along at a straight line like this, it's bowing out in the middle, because that's where the strongest winds are on the backside. So right there where my fingers touch, that's where the winds are, the outflow winds on the backside, they're blowing even stronger. And they blow that portion of the storm out farther, faster than the rest of the storm around it, causing that bowing that you see. Now, again, I don't want to be in the path of that anywhere, but the absolute last place I want to be is in the path of the peak of a bow echo, because that's where my tornado threat, if I'm going to get any tornadoes, and they're not common on squall lines, but they do happen. If they're going to happen with the peak of the bow. So we need to recognize that again. We'll look at it ahead of time, see it coming on our radar app. If we see it coming from miles away, we can plan accordingly. If we see it this close as in the picture, it's too late to do much other than, again, stop, point as much into that oncoming storm as you can, and continue on your way. Now, let's say this is a storm that was approaching down in Reno County a few years ago. If you're on K96, headed off to, where it's in the north and south, or a diagonal road, you can kind of point directly into that. But if it's coming in from the northwest and moving to the southeast, there's not a lot of roads around here that will allow you to park diagonally and point directly into that. So you got to just do the best you can. Minimize your exposure of your broadside and point as much into that oncoming gust front as you can to keep everybody safe. Moving on now, talking about supercells. Everything is on the threat table with these. Very strong straight line winds like a squall line. Very heavy flooding rains like off the multi-cell cluster. Large hail is a possibility, and unfortunately tornadoes are a possibility. So they are the highest threat storm that we deal with around here. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about recognizing some of the features, because again, you take the Andover tornado and you back the clock up about 4.5, 5 hours, there would have been buses on the street. And we didn't get a tornado warning on that storm because of the way it looked. It was not recognizable as a tornadic storm. So only the people who were paying attention to the radio or paying attention to their phones would have gotten any warning that this thing was on the ground producing a tornado. So we need to recognize some of those clues Mother Nature will give us. Supercells are individual storms, like our pulse thunderstorms that we talked about at the very beginning, individual storms, but much bigger. They can cover an entire county. They give us clues as to their strength. If we look at the updraft tower, and we see a tilted updraft tower here, if we look for these lines in the clouds, these twisting, striping bands, these are called striation. That tells me there's rotation with this storm. Any rotating storm is automatically a danger to us. If it has a tilted tower on the backside of it, the updraft tower, that's taking all that moisture up and building that big thunderhead and the anvil and all that, then we know that this storm is going to be long-lasting, because the tilt is significant, because now all the rain is being drawn up within the updraft here. It doesn't go straight up and then fall straight back down like a pulse thunderstorm that chokes itself out. It goes up and over and up and over, and then it falls in the forward flank of the storm, allowing the updraft to survive. The longer the updraft lives, the greater the storm is going to build and the greater the threat for severe weather off of it. Other clues that we can see when we look at this, underneath that rain-free base, and again it's rain-free because this is the heart of my updraft. All the moisture in the area is being drawn in and pushed up and then tilted forward and not falling back down, leaving this area rain-free. Now, my comparison, let me back up just one slide. If you've been parked on this road and look in this direction as this storm moved across your field of view from left to right, you probably would not have messed with the really thick rain and hail core as it moved across your road path. But then, as the clearing area came through, you're thinking, okay, we're behind the threat. Not so fast. Underneath that rain-free base, where it looks calm by comparison to the rain shaft off in the distance, this is potentially your most dangerous part of the storm, because this is where the rotation can concentrate and start to form things like wall clouds, as we see in this slide here. The video on the right shows you is sped up, and you see clouds as you watch this. You kind of see clouds just forming out of nowhere and immediately becoming part of the parent thunderstorm. Those are forming into a wall cloud. A wall cloud in the left image, that big blocky extension, sometimes, the classic look, it's real easy to identify. Sometimes it's not so much, and as you watch this time-lapse video, you'll see how the wall cloud gets bigger, and you see how it breaks up and gets smaller, and then it comes back. You see you get a nice little point on it from time to time. If you ever see one of those points on a wall cloud, it's generally pointing towards the direction of the rain. The storm is moving after the rain, so the direction the wall cloud is pointing should be the direction the storm is moving. So it can give us a helpful hint in that regard. But if we're this close, all right, it's because we got caught off guard. It was because it was an Andover-type thunderstorm that nobody recognized as being tornadic until it was almost too late. If you see that blocky lowering of the cloud, it forms because that air, as we see in the time-lapse video there, that's very heavily saturated air, and it starts to rise. And before the rotation picked up, it was forming back into a cloud at this level right here. But now it's spinning faster, and it's rising faster, and it's forming into a cloud closer to the ground. So as it forms, as it appears basically out of nowhere, it immediately attaches itself to the parent thunderstorm above it, and that's how we get a wall cloud. It moves together with the storm, so if what you're looking at and thinking it might be a wall cloud is not moving at the same, how this is getting pushed out here, this is no longer a wall cloud. These are scary looking clouds, they're not actually scary at that point. It's the part that stays together, it's the part that stays cohesive and continues to spin that we need to worry about as our threat. Here's another example of wall clouds, and you see the point that I'm talking about on the upper level picture, how it's pointing off in the direction of the rain shaft over here, pointing in the direction that the storm might be moving. This is inflow. If I was to see this in video, I would see these clouds being drawn along this line back into the storm and adjusted upward. Meanwhile, down below, if you haven't noticed, this is a video in real time, no time lapse. We can see the rotation if we look around the edges of the storm. These little fingerlings of clouds that are hanging down, or over here where we got a little more sunlight on it, we can tell that it's rotating counterclockwise. And if we watch, it's also getting closer and closer to the ground. These are really bad signs. And we've zoomed in a little bit here. Again, you can see the rotation. This part of the cloud is coming out from behind and wrapping towards me. The part that's closest to me is wrapping around this way and going behind the storm. They're always going to rotate counterclockwise. And if we're this close to the storm and we're seeing this type of rotation, we need to back up immediately. We've gotten ourselves into a very dangerous situation, and that storm is capable of producing a tornado at any moment when the clouds get that tightly organized. There's another clue that we've got that a tornado may be about to form, and I mean just within seconds when we see this happen. It's something called rear flank downdraft. Now normally we like to see the clouds break up and break apart and sunshine start replacing the cloudy overcast skies. But if that happens at the wrong place at the wrong time, it's actually one of the worst danger signs there is. And I'll let this
Part
video.
of a mature mesocyclone is downward moving air on the backside of the supercell. The RFD, or rear flank downdraft. This descending air dries out a portion of the cloud and evaporates it, creating what looks to be a bright area or a hole in the cloud.
So within your updraft tower, you've got a lot of upward motion. It's pushing cloud and wind and everything up, and it's going to continue to rise until it hits the inversion layer, which acts like a cap. Maybe at 35,000 feet, maybe at 60,000 feet. It just depends on the day. And when that wind hits that cap, it kind of mushrooms out. And the wind aloft will take that updraft wind and take the updraft clouds and push them downstream and give us that nice pointed angle on the front of our supercell thunderstorm. But if it hits with enough force, then some of that wind is going to hit that cap and come bouncing back down the backside of our thunderstorm tower. Really cold, dry air at this point, streaming down the backside of this. Right before it hits the ground, it encounters all that low-level cloudiness within our rain-free base. And as he said, as that dry air moves through the wet, cloudy air, it just evaporates the clouds in an instant. It sucks all the moisture out of the air, and the clouds are gone. And then that wind doesn't just disappear after it evaporates the clouds. It hits the ground just like dropping a bucket of water. And as that wind hits the ground, it's going to shoot out 360 degrees from there. Some of it is going to go towards you, some towards me. Some of it's going to cut right underneath our rain-free base. And if it cuts underneath it with enough force, it'll cut out the updraft and the storm will die, and that's a good thing. But unfortunately, what happens all too often with that rain-free RFD is that it takes the broad rotation that had been there just spinning harmlessly, and it tightens it up suddenly and violently, and we go from no wall cloud, nothing visible, to tornado on the ground in less than a minute. And I can prove that to you with the storm that hit out by Mount Hope back in 2015. So here's a storm spotter. Mount Hope is just off the camera to the right over here. He's on 263rd Street West. K96 is on his back bumper. He's looking south at 101st Street. That's what this little white dot is, a car moving out of Maze. Mount Hope, if I said Maze. He's headed east on 101st Street North. Now this is the rain-free base underneath this thunderstorm that you see the radar inset over here. If you look closely at some of these clouds that are closest to us, you can see that it's rotating counterclockwise. But it's nice, constant, slow rotation, nothing to get worried about here. We're just watching this storm and watching what might happen within this rain-free base. That's at 4:47 in the afternoon. All right, are you still on the road at 4:47? All right. 4:48 hours. This is from the other side. So my first spotter was over here by the P, or O in Mount Hope. My other spotter is about 180 degrees opposite, looking back at it. If they could see far enough, they could see the other spotter on the far side of this rain-free base we're looking at. I just put this up there to show you. All right, nothing hinky going on with this thing. It's just your average run-of-the-mill developing supercell thunderstorm. Doesn't even have the traditional hook angle on it or anything like that, but it does have the rain-free base, and we did note the rotation in the storm from the other angle. That's at 4:48, so just 1 minute later. The next slide is going to be at 4:49. Listen closely. I'm going to turn the volume back up just a little bit. Listen closely to what the spotter says.
Hey, this is Jim Reba. I'm in Mount Hope. Tornado's on the ground. It's just to the west of 96. Yes, it is in contact with the ground. Thank you.
Did you see the tornado? No. Some of you did, but most of you didn't, and that's okay. Before I play this video again, I'm going to tell you the definition of a tornado. A violently rotating column of air in contact with the thunderstorm in the ground. What does a violently rotating column of air look like? What does the wind look like? All right, you cannot see that rotating column of air unless you see it touching something on the ground and destroying it, or if nothing else, kicking up dust from a farm field like this one was doing. So I'm going to play this video again, and I want you to look. There's kind of a Quonset hut off in the distance. And just on this side of that, you're going to see a dust spout kicking up. And if you look up above, you're going to see a funnel cloud in the sky as well. And down below it, you're going to see the rotation. So
Hey, this
here's
is
my
Jim
funnel,
Reba. I'm in
here's
Mount
my
Hope.
contact
Tornado's
with
on
the
the
ground.
ground. It's just to the west of 96. Yes, it is in contact with the ground.
There's my contact with the ground. It's kind of disappeared a little bit. It's going to get kicked back up. So what changed? We looked at that thing at 447.
Hey, this is Jim
Nothing.
Raybuck.
Oops, hang on just a second, Jim. We looked at that thing at 447, nothing. At 448, nothing. And at 449,
Hey,
tornado
this
on the
is Jim
ground.
Raybuck. I'm in Mount Hope, tornadoes on the
changed?
ground. It's just to the
Rear
west
flank
of
down there. There's your
96.
notch that it blew in the hole of that clouds. Was that
Yes,
rear
it
flank
is in
down there?
contact with the
It did.
ground.
Hit the ground,
Thank
tightened
you.
up that rotation, and that would eventually go on to become an EF3 tornado. Destroyed one farm home on
Hey,
our
this
side
is
of the
Jim
line.
Raybuck. I'm in Mount Hope, tornadoes on the ground. It's just to the west of
That's
96.
a loop.
Can
But-
you point to that tornado?
Yeah. So it's kind of hard to see, especially when it starts across the road. When it's in its early stages, there's the debris cloud right there. There's your funnel cloud here, debris cloud down below it. There's a column of rotating air making it all the way down to the ground, kicking up that dirt.
Is that
Oh,
the
I
storm,
see it now,
is that
yeah.
the storm that went clear up across 50?
Cross
up that
50
way?
up in
I
Harvey
live on
County.
151st Street. I stood in my front yard and watched it go north.
Well, you're lucky. It was small. It was small when it first started.
About 4 miles west of me.
Yeah. Jim continued to follow this storm. He got some other great videos. You see him backing up there. What he did was he parked on K96 facing eastbound. Parked in a lane of traffic, not on the shoulder. And he watched that tornado cross another field, and it got really noticeable then because it went across a dirt field and picked up all that loose dirt and was able to fill that vortex with dirt so you could see it. But then when it crosses the highway, it doesn't have any more dirt to pick up, because it's going across grass and asphalt. And so the tornado, in a sense, disappeared, at least visually. If you knew what you're looking for, you could still see it. And that's the thing, you don't always see it when it first starts. It might look like it goes away because the Andover tornado did. Some people thought it had lifted, but it just became less visible. Even though you don't see that condensation funnel coming all the way to the ground, you could still have a tornado on your hand, on the ground, doing damage, and you absolutely need to recognize the threat. So, if that dark, foreboding cloud up ahead, here's what the rain-free base looked like. You'll notice there's no notch on it at 4:48 hours. But if all of a sudden we get that bright hole in the clouds and sunlight comes streaming in right on the backside of the thunderstorm, that's not a good thing. That's a very bad thing. We need to look for potential for this storm to quickly go tornadic. When I tell my spotters where to be out in the field, that's what this slide is again for my storm spotters. I tell them they want them to be in a safe position because they need to make it home. So for anybody that's out when these things move in, the very first thing we have to know before we figure out if we're safe here or not is what direction the storm is moving. And that's where your radar app on your phone is going to come in. That's where communicating back here with the bus barn is going to come in. Figure out where that storm is and which direction it's moving. If it's moving off to the northeast like this, then I tell my spotters to get down here because it keeps them out of harm's way and gives them good visibility. That's not your priority. Your priority is to find the safest place. This is safe, or I wouldn't send my spotters down here, so you could be in this area relative to the storm. You don't want to be where two of these red X's are at least. For spotters, I don't want them up here because they're outside. They may be safe, but they can't see anything. For a bus driver, this is fine. If this is you, as long as you're not driving forward or south into that storm path, yes, being on the north side of the storm, having it move away from you, there's no problem there. Just stop, let it clear your path. You don't want to be up here depending on which direction you're moving. I guess if you're moving north or moving northeast or straight east, as long as you stay ahead of the storm, you'll be fine. But as a spotter, that's not good because you're not going to see the rain-free base until it's too late. The absolute worst place to be is where this guy is down here. So figure out what that storm movement is. Move away from the storm at right angles if you have to. Just make sure that you're in a position that's tenable, that you're not going to get caught up in either the rain or the hail core or by anything that's developing within the Hook Echo. That's where our rain-free base and our most likely area of tornado development is with this storm. I've mentioned several times looking at the radar app on your phone. Hopefully you have one. As a bus driver, you probably should, because you might be the only indicator of trouble ahead by looking at your radar app. You might not get a warning from the Weather Service in time, as I've mentioned several times with the Andover tornado last year. So we'll spend just a little bit of time talking about interpreting radar imagery. If you don't have one, you ask me which one to get, I'm going to tell you get one of the local TV station apps. They all come with location services, which will put a little pin in the map for you and let you know where you're at. And now you can look at that radar in loop mode and you can see if it's moving towards you or moving away from you. Not quite as critical when you're here around geography that you know, but some of you are going to take kids on sporting events and other field trips outside of Sedgwick County where you don't know the geography as well. So having that locator pin is going to help you know where you're at in the county that you're in now and know where you are relative to that storm and keep yourself safe. So get a radar app, get the locate one with location services, all 3 of the local stations offer that. And then when you're using the app, allow it to access the location information on your phone so it can put that pin in there for you. There's some things I want you to be able to read. Now, we probably all are pretty good by now, all the local weathermen. Anytime there's a supercell thunderstorm, they always put it on the radar, and they always talk about the hook echo, and they explain this is where the rotation area of the storm is, this is where any likely tornado development is. And pinks and purples and other colors up here, this is where our likely hail core is with this storm. We're all pretty good at reading the reflectivity on radars by now. But maybe not so much the velocity. So I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the velocity, because this could be the only way you know that you've got rotation and a possible tornado up ahead. On the night of April 29th, well, I'm going to confuse the issue. So let me just back up. If I'm going to look at my radar, I need to know what the colors mean, and they mean different things depending on where my radar is located. So in a broad sense, green indicates winds that are moving towards the radar. Red is winds that are moving away from the radar. Think of red taillights moving away from you, the red winds are moving away from you. The brighter those colors get and the closer they get to white, the stronger the intensity of those winds. So now as I look at something like this, the first question I have to know, or the answer to, is where is my radar located? Because where my radar ball is makes all the difference in the world as to how I interpret this bright red and green mixture right here. You see in this image, the radar is located down here, off in this direction. So I've got a radar ball down here shooting its beam of energy through this storm, going along a line here, and then a line here, and a line here. And right here along that narrow line that's going through that storm, I've got winds moving very fast towards the radar, and winds that are moving very fast away from the radar. Right in close proximity to you, right on either side of that very narrow radar beam. So what I've got there, I've got rotation. Think about what the clouds would be doing there if the wind is moving that fast in opposite directions that close to each other. That's a rotational couplet. That's what a developing tornado or a tornado on the ground is going to look like on velocity. But if I move my radar, it scrambles the whole picture. If I take my radar up and put it up here, it's going to be similar. It's just going to flip-flop the colors. It'll be green moving this way, red moving this way. But I'm still going to have rotation along that tight radar beam going through there. Now let me put my radar up here where this crossroads is. And now my beam of energy is hitting these same colors, but it's coming in from this direction here. Now I've got winds moving away from the radar, and on the backside of it, I've got winds moving towards the radar. And what I've got now is a collision where those two meet. I don't have rotation going this way. I've got winds colliding. You take that and expand that out, that's what it's going to look like on the front side of a squall line. The inflow winds moving away from the radar towards the storm, the outflow winds moving out of the storm and towards the radar, and right where they meet, we get a collision. Now I take my radar ball from up here, and I put it down here in this corner, and it flips the script again. Now the winds that are closest to my radar are moving towards me. The winds that are farthest away from my radar are moving away from me, and in the middle, I've got a wind divergence. I've got the wind splitting, because I've got a downburst of wind hitting here, and it's spreading out in all directions after it hits the ground. And if you're getting a microburst that's developing, that's what the wind signature on that might look like, because the winds from microburst are very intense. They come straight down. There's no rotation with them, but it doesn't need to be. It comes straight down, it hits, and it splashes out in all directions, and you get that divergence of wind. So knowing where your radar is really critical to being able to interpret what we see when we look at the wind intensity on that. Doesn't matter quite so much when we're looking at reflectivity, because the signals are more constant there. They don't change with the direction of the radar. But with the wind speeds, they certainly did. All right, so knowing what I just told you, what do we have in the circle on the right? Do we have rotation? Do we have a wind split? Do we have a wind collision? Exactly, what do we have? What do you have to know first? What question should you ask me?
Where's your radar?
Where's my radar? Thank you. My radar is up here. So now it's looking through those winds, and you see the angle. You see the greens moving toward it, and the reds moving toward it. So now what do we have? Somebody be brave. Rotation. We've got the winds moving towards the radar, winds moving away from the radar, right next to each other along that tight radar beam. That's a rotational signal. And yet, if you look at the storm on the right, on the left, you look at the reflectivity, that doesn't look like what we expect a tornadic storm to look like. That doesn't look like a supercell with a hook echo. It is a supercell. It kind of looks like a squall line, as somebody else said, but it's not. They don't always look the same on radar. They don't always show us what they are. The area in the radar on the left, in the reflectivity here, this is the same area of the storm that's showing rotation. This should be where my hook is. This should be where my rain-free base is. But this was a Lawrence tornado. An EF4 tornado was on the ground right here, and it was completely rain-wrapped. There were no reports coming in from the spotters in the field because they just couldn't see it. You can't go core punching a rain-wrapped storm because you don't know what's inside, and if it's a tornado, it's going to be the last chase you go on. So they were keeping a respectable distance, and so only people who were looking, either watching TV or listening on radio or looking at their radar app on their phones, are going to know the threat in this area here as it's moving off towards Lawrence. Radar's a great tool. Use it in combination with what you see in the clouds to paint a broader picture, a more complete picture, and know where you are relative to the storm, know what you need to do to stay safe. Keep in mind it has some limitations. The radar, for example, will only update every 5 minutes on average. So check that radar timestamp that you're looking at and make sure how old the picture might be. Here in Sedgwick County, we don't have to worry about this so much, but when you get farther away from Sedgwick County and farther away from the radar, the farther it is from the radar side, the higher it is looking in the storm. So it might see things aloft in this storm that aren't really a threat at the ground level. There's only rotation, 12,000 feet off the ground, and it's not making it all the way down. So just remember that. The timestamp and how far are you from the radar. Again, if you're running your route here in Sedgwick County, it's not an issue. But again, if you're on one of those field trips or sports trips, you might get farther away from the radar, and you keep that in mind. Looking at this radar image here, what would you expect to be our main threat with this? Sorry? Hail. I think that's her hail. And that is exactly right. You see where the radar ball is, and it's shooting through the storm this way. It's hitting the hail core here, and it's giving what's called a three-body scatter spike, or a hail spike, on the downstream side of it. This is trying to project a three-dimensional image of the storm on a two-dimensional radar screen. This is actually coming straight out away from the radar. The top of that hail spike would be if I could just grab it and pull it towards you. This is where the greatest threat is with this storm. And when we see a hail core like this and we see that hail spike on the downstream side of the radar beam, then we know we've probably got something that we want to avoid there. What would you expect to be the main threat with this storm? Rain is a threat, but this is a squall line thunderstorm, and all along that blue line is a very strong gust front that's moving through the fairgrounds at Indianapolis. And if you remember that, you might have seen the video. The Sugar Land concert was about to start. The winds came through. All those people were in the infield in front of the stage when the stage collapsed on top of them and killed 7 people. It does not take a tornado to be dangerous, especially if you're driving a high-profile vehicle like a school bus. High winds can be just as damaging and potentially just as deadly as anything that's twisting on the ground. I'm going to show you some videos here that are going to make you say some things that you shouldn't say in front of kids. We're going to talk about flooding, especially as it relates to school buses. Flooding overall is the #1 killer of all severe weather events. Not tornadoes, not lightning, not anything else. Flooding, because people get impatient and they just go driving through areas that they should not be driving through. And this isn't even the worst one. Gets to the other side, doesn't have a chance to move unless somebody unless somebody moves and gets out of the way for him. And there's no commentary in what I'm about to say, but notice that was a short bus. Okay? And I say that only because it's lighter weight. I mean, it's more susceptible to being swept away than the bigger buses are. And they got lucky, honestly, to drive through and make it to the far side. You just can't drive through water-covered roadways. You don't know if the roadway's still there. With that much force, it could be undercutting the roadway, and there could be nothing but a gaping chasm up there that you're not going to see until you're nose down in it. It may look shallow here at the edges where it is shallow, but the closer you get to the source of that flooding, the closer you get to the stream or creek, it's going to be much deeper and much faster. And so, yeah, it may make you a little bit late, but it's better to get there alive than to try and forge ahead and go into something like that. Now this one, this is a news story, and I'll play the video here. You're going to hear him talk about the school bus being swept off the roadway. And it looks like the bus was swept off the roadway. That's why lazy reporters that don't check their facts just say what somebody writes for them. But as I play the video, watch to which direction the water is moving. Oops. Sorry, give me a second. Forgot I muted it.
In Picture Rocks, a busload of kids were rescued on their way home from school this afternoon after floodwaters nearly swept their bus completely off the road. And on your sides, Ryan Fish has more on the rescue that came after a sudden surge of rain.
There we go.
The water flow.
Monsoon with its own after-school special on Friday. This flash flood nearly tipping this school bus over, with kids still inside. Pima County Sheriff's deputies in Picture Rocks firefighters rescued 39 kids and 2 drivers, moving them to a second bus to get them home safely. Thankfully, no one was hurt.
It was pretty intense. The rain was pretty heavy. We couldn't see much.
While it's usually cars and not school buses that get stranded in floodwater, Picture Rocks Fire Chief Brett Lane says this is what his district trains for every spring.
Several children were crying and upset. Some kids seemed to be unfazed, but we had enough personnel and the proper training to get them out expeditiously, got them out quickly without incident.
The bus was coming from Picture Rocks Elementary. Marana Unified School District says the driver acted quickly and called district transportation, who then called law enforcement for help.
We calls for several rescues.
According to Lane, firefighters rescued 4 other people in the area as heavy rain came in and washes flooded, with more rain expected this weekend.
You just be aware of your surroundings. You know, turn around, don't drown.
Good advice. Now, that bus didn't get swept off by the water, did it? What happened?
She tried to drive through it.
She tried to drive through it and then probably overcorrected. They couldn't tell where the edge of the road was, just like we talked about before. They got too close to the shoulder. The shoulder had been eroded by that flowing water, and so it was a much deeper drop-off than what she was probably he or she was normally used to. And so they ended up with half the bus off the shoulder at a very precarious angle. Now, he said that they called their bus barn, and the bus barn called 911. And that's fine if that's the way you have to do it. It's also okay to call 911 directly, because they're going to have some questions that way they can ask you directly, so you don't have to relay it through the radio and try and get the answer that way. But whatever is your policy, follow that, of course. But just remember, it's not necessarily being swept downstream by the force of the water. If you try to drive through water-covered roadways where you can't see where the edge is, you can't see where the danger is, that can give you just as much problem. Now this one here, I don't know if you've ever seen this one. It still has quite a pucker factor to it. This is north of Austin a few years ago. Now I want you to know, okay, anybody have low water crossings on their routes? Okay, thank God. This is a low water crossing that we've all driven across one in our lives, whether in a bus or not. Note these signposts here. I don't know how tall they are. They are at least 3 feet, if not more. And then they're a good foot or 2 up above the creek bed. So at the very least, the top of this sign is 5 feet above where the water is flowing at this moment. At the very least. Just remember that. Now sometimes there's going to be barricades up, big barricades all across the roadway that will warn us, and sometimes there might just be a little sign, like there's going to be on this one. Here's your road closed sign right there. And there again. And we're approaching that low water crossing I just showed you a minute ago.
Oh, wow.
Those signs I talked about, pointed out before, it's hard to see in this video, but there they are.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, wow.
And this is a big bus,
Oh, no.
and it almost goes over there.
Oh, no.
It rights itself, thankfully, but now it's not a
No,
bus
it's not.
anymore, it's a boat.
Yeah.
It's
And
the
it's
USS Oak Crab. Only 2 people on the bus, the driver and a 12-year-old child. Could have been their own child. I don't know if it was one of their students or their own child. I don't have that information. But this video just keeps going because they just keep going. They are floating merrily, merrily, merrily down the stream.
Wow.
You mean they're still trying to,
No, they're not trying. They're just, They're panicking. There's no road underneath them. They are in the middle of the stream.
Backwards.
Going down and backwards, you're right. I'll just jump forward another minute or so ahead, 30 seconds or so ahead.
Did they call for help?
Well, that's the question I was about to ask. I'm sure they were calling on the radio for help. But they're about to get hung up in the trees here. We're about to the end of the video. They get wedged in some trees along the bank. But how the heck do you tell the rescue workers where to find you?
Yeah, you
They're going to have to go to the closest place they can put a boat in, upstream from where you are now, and come down to you, most likely. If they're really lucky, they might find a farmer's field that gets them really up close to where the creek is and get to you that way. But how muddy is that field going to be with that much rain that just fell? So, yeah, that was one that just boggles the mind. But it's not just other states. You might remember this one from north of Douglas. That's a low water crossing on that bus driver's route. Tried to push it back in October 2013. 10 kids on the bus. They all got out okay. The driver had to be airlifted to Wesley. I never did hear a follow-up on what injuries they might have suffered. But we see that around here. Here's one from West Wichita. This is a Goddard school bus. And now the driver that was on this bus was actually at my Goddard class. I got her permission to use this slide because I didn't want to embarrass her. But we learn the most from our oops moments. And she tried to do the right thing. She was approaching from the far side of the water. She saw the water-covered roadway. Not going to drive through it. I'm going to turn around. I'm not going to risk the bus. The only thing she did wrong, she didn't call for help. She didn't call for a spotter who could have warned her when she was backing up that she was getting too close to the edge of the road. There's not a lot of room to turn a bus there. I sympathize with her. It was going to take about a 25-point turn back and forth. Get it turned around. She tried to do the right thing. The bus was not occupied at the time, thank goodness. But still, even when we do the right things, we have to make sure we've got enough help to see what we're doing. I've never tried to drive a school bus. I can only imagine what the visibility issues would be like when you're trying to back up on that narrow of a roadway to avoid a flood. I'm sorry? Yeah, that's okay. So it's not just safety that's an issue. There could be other issues at work if you find yourself in a situation.
Bus driver is off the job tonight. This after she was accused of driving around the road closure barricades and through a flooded road. As WWA1's Kirsten Gutierrez explains, not only was it caught on camera, there were students on the bus.
I think she put those children in a very dangerous situation.
A South Brunswick High School bus driver accused of ignoring road closures on Highway 133, endangering the lives of students.
We pulled up to check the water level and the bus pulled up to the barricade. So I thought, Lord, it turned around. It didn't. She got out of the bus, moved the barricade off the road, drove through the barricade, left the barricade off the side of the road.
Bruce Felker, a former volunteer firefighter,
drove through it.
everything on his phone. It's a situation Felker says he never wants to see again.
I got to thinking about my own children and grandchildren and how that would affect me personally, just knowing that they were put in that predicament.
A Brunswick County School spokeswoman said Marcia McMillan had worked as a school bus driver and custodian since 2007 until Tuesday afternoon.
It was in very short order that it was determined that the driver's actions were truly inexcusable.
Felker says he's had to pull one too many cars out of the floodwaters and knows how dangerous this part of the highway has been for years.
The bus could have went off the road potentially, rolled over into the trees, who knows?
Felker says the DOT needs to fix the problem area. Meanwhile, the school hopes others don't judge all Brunswick County drivers.
It is a tough job and they are unsung heroes, so we really hope that the actions of one individual will not reflect poorly on the rest of our incredible driving fleet.
In Brunswick County, Kirsten Gutierrez, WWAY News.
Last we checked, Felker's video on Facebook has more than 2,000 views, and as for the school, Brunswick County school officials say all drivers will be refreshed on standard procedures.
So one of you does something wrong, the rest of your coworkers are going to have to pay for it by sitting through a training meeting or remedial training. So that's one ramification of it. The less glib one is that the fact that the person lost their job. They got lucky, nobody was hurt, the bus made it through, but if there was injuries or loss of life, you're open to civil lawsuits at that point by doing something stupid like moving a barricade, driving past it, leaving it off the road. So there's just no excuse for this. I know we are all always on a time crunch, but I'm certain the school is going to have your back if you're late because you had to avoid a flooded roadway. And if they don't, call me and I'll come testify on your behalf. So, talked about a lot about flooding safety. We'll do just a couple more safety slides here. Talking about tornado safety outdoors. And in a word, there is none. There is no good way to survive a tornado outside, period. So the best thing to do is recognize the threat and avoid the situation altogether by an early release, a late release, whatever it might be, and not putting ourselves in a situation like that. And that's all great for me to stand up here and say, and it sounds so easy, but then I think back to April 29th of last year and how we got so lucky that the timing was just right that there weren't buses out, because they wouldn't have known that this threat was coming on that day, and they would have had buses right in the path of it. But here's a video from some people in a small car in Taiwan trying to outrun a tornado, which is coming up from behind them. They try to run this red light, this car cuts them off. It's a good thing. Now the tornado is going to eat that. And where did she come from?
What in the world?
I have watched this video dozens of times, and I cannot tell you if she was a passenger in that car or if she was waiting on a bus 3 blocks back.
She is clearly stunned.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I think the video is going to loop around here. So watch. She just, the cloud is there and you can't see where she comes from. I can't tell if she's in this car or not. She's going to end up appearing about right over here.
Maybe the tornado picked her up and just dropped her off.
That's exactly right. It may have. She may have been pulled out of that car. She may have been 3 blocks back waiting on the bus. There's the car that pulled up. I never did see the door open on the car. I mean, it's happening fast and you can't see a lot. But anyway, there's the tornado, all that debris in the air. There is no good way to avoid a tornado outside, so we don't get ourselves in those positions. We want to get inside, right? Just like our first video of the day, the school bus driver that got her kids back to the school just in time, got them off the bus and got them inside the school. Hopefully we're not still sheltering in gyms. Probably all our schools. In fact, Tim, you confirm that for me. All the schools now have a safe room, right?
Yeah, but some of them are gyms.
Well, but if
designed as safe rooms.
okay, if they're designed as safe rooms, they're okay. This video that you're about to see here from Henryville is from the old-fashioned, large-span gymnasium room that isn't reinforced to be a safe room. And once that goes, once you get any type of rip in the wall or the ceiling or anything like that, it's lights out. And that's what's happened right here.
Wow.
The winds are now inside. Great camera system, though. It never fails during this whole event. Gives a pretty good video.
What roof?
Yeah, exactly what roof. If it's a designated storm shelter, if it's been designed as a safe room and it's a gymnasium, it's okay. This one was not. And this is why it's not okay to shelter inside of rooms with those large span ceilings. So we need to get kids, if we're at home, obviously we need to get to the basement. If we're in the schools, we need to get to a safe room. If basements or a safe room aren't available, we need to get to an interior room, something without windows, get as many walls between us and the storm as possible, and then get under something sturdy. Most of the people killed or injured by tornadoes, it's because of debris falling on them from above. So get under someplace safe and sturdy, and then stay there until you know it's safe to come out. And as we saw in the video, we want to avoid anything with a large span room. Now I'm going to ask you guys some questions. What is the district's plan for transport during severe weather? Do we hold them? Do we release early? Do we some combination of that? Who knows? All right, if we don't know, we need to find out. You need to know what the plan is, and you need to know your role in that plan. You need to know how it applies to you. You need to know if there's storms coming and you can see them, and I've told you about how to recognize a squall line. You know you don't want to be driving when that squall line gets here. What's the plan? Are we going to hold the kids? Are we going to get them out early? If there isn't a plan, we need to develop one, honestly. How are we going to get that critical weather information when we're out in the field? Are we just going to be strictly relying on our phones, or is somebody going to be on the radio telling us what's going on? Okay.
Radio's right.
Radio's good.
have a question.
Yes.
So I've only lived in Wichita for a year, so I'm really new to the whole, from Arizona, so when you show that video, I kind of was laughing because I was like, I remember that. What is, like if they do early release, how far in advance will the schools know? Because I don't think I've ever experienced where they do early release for tornado.
And I don't know that Mage does, to be honest with you. I know some districts do that, so does anybody know if that's part of the Mage plan?
Early release for snow and stuff, and the roads are bad.
Okay.
And we didn't rain one time.
Like 20 years. I think just for the sheer size, it would be more of a.
Probably more of a hole. And that makes sense. Yeah, you screw up a lot more lives with an early release than you do with holding them there. So that's probably a better way to do it. But, I mean, they do early releases for weather, just winter weather.
Just wait, wait, wait.
So,
Icy roads and stuff.
you know,
Extra time.
Yeah.
if we're looking at a high threat day for significant tornadoes or things like that, it might make sense to do an early release on those things. I'm not advocating that we should do it. I'm just saying it should be part of the conversation to decide, is that something we want to look at in terms of policy? I'm not here to rewrite your policies for you. I'm just here to make sure that we know that there is a policy, and again, we know what our role in the plan is. I know there are some districts that used to do this. I don't know if anybody does it anymore, but they would have safe houses along the way. We do?
Yeah, we have map books and we're supposed to contact our parents to see if we have a safe house. We have a list of schools we can go to. We have a list of businesses we can go to.
Oh, great.
To evacuate into.
Wonderful. Because if you're out in the middle of the road, and an Andover day, you're out in the middle of your route, I should say, and an Andover tornado type day comes along, and all of a sudden there's a tornado on the ground that nobody saw coming, no warning until it was actually on the ground, you don't have time to get back to the school at that point. You need to know a contingency plan, just in case. Where's the closest place I can get these kids into shelter? And even if it's somebody's house along the route that has agreed to let you offload the bus and get them into their basement, that's much better than trying to ride it out inside that bus. It's absolutely what we must do. As we saw with the video, there's no good way to survive tornadoes outside. It's very dangerous, especially on something. Your bus is not going to help you. Remember that very first video from when we started? That bus got picked up out of the school parking lot, taken across the street, and slammed into a restaurant. The bus may be heavy, but it's not going to be any match for a tornado, because it's basically a big sail in the eyes of a tornado, that broadside of that bus. Any other comments or questions along that? Anybody have questions that they've never had answered? Yeah.
I have a question because of what changed. It used to be if there was a tornado in the county, all the sirens would blow in the county, and then National Weather Service or TV stations thought it would be really good. Let's not worry everybody. Let's just kind of focus on the tornado path area, which to me, like in a big city, was detrimental. Because if you have school districts and you've got buses here, they may not know they are driving into the tornado zone, and why do they go away from that in a big city?
Okay. We actually had a big part of that as well in emergency management, because it's our siren system that sounds. So the Weather Service years ago started switching to warning polygons. They didn't issue the warning for the entire county. They issued a warning polygon. So it's narrow back here where the tornado is, and then it spreads out downstream of the storm where it might go. And now that's hooked into our siren computer. So when that polygon is issued, it identifies all the sirens that are in or can be heard within that warned area, and those are the ones that sound. Because if the storm is on Mount Hope and moving towards Newton, we don't need to bother the folks in Hayesville and Mulvane and Derby. If we keep sounding those sirens over and over again when there's no threat, there's no possibility of danger, it's going to be like the Joplin situation, where they sounded the sirens too frequently and people stopped listening to the sirens. So it's an attempt to avoid complacency. Now, if Wichita is involved, that polygon automatically gets much bigger, and it affects a larger area. But it's still going to be concentrated to places where the threat is real. Because if you're behind the storm, outside of the storm's path, we don't want to make people panic by sounding sirens when there's no threat and no possibility. Now, the other thing that happens with that polygon is it generates something called a WEA, a wireless emergency alert, that goes to your cell phone. And if you're outside of the area, the warned area, when that WEA is generated, you're not going to get it on your cell phone, because the cell phone towers are going to triangulate where your cell phone is located, and they're going to see you're not anywhere in the danger zone. But if you continue to drive and you pass into the area while the warning